may at present be difficult to ascertain, for it seems to be agreed on all hands that in the early ages of Christianity in this island, parishes were unknown, or at least signified the same that a diocese does now. There was then no appropriation of ecclesiastical dues to any particular church, but every man was at liberty to contribute his tithes to whatever priest or church he pleased, provided only that he did it to some, or, if he made no special appointment or appropriation thereof, they were paid into the hands of the bishop, whose duty it was to distribute them among the clergy, and for other pious purposes, according to his own discretion. Mr. Camden says England was divided into parishes by Archbishop Honorius about the year 630. Sir Henry Hobart lays it down that parishes were first erected by the Council of Lateran, which was held A.D. 1179, each wildly differing from the other, and both of them perhaps from the truth, which will probably be found in the medium between the two extremes. For Mr. Selden has clearly shown that the clergy lived in common without any division of parishes long after the time mentioned by Camden, and it appears from the Saxon laws that parishes were in being long before the date of that Council of Lateran, to which they are ascribed by Hobart. We find the distinction of parishes, nay, even of mother churches, so early as in the laws of King Edgar, about the year 970. Before that time, the consecration of tithes was in general arbitrary, that is, every man paid his own, as was before observed, to what church or parish he pleased, but this being liable to be attended with either fraud, or at least caprice, in the persons paying, and with either jealousies or mean compliances in such as were competitors for receiving them, it was now ordered by the law of King Edgar, that, quote, dentur omnes decimae primeriae ecclesiae ad quam parochia pertinet. However, if any thane or great lord had a church within his own demesnes, distinct from the mother church, in the nature of a private chapel, then, provided such church had a cemetery or consecrated place of burial belonging to it, he might allot 1/3 of his tithes for the maintenance of the officiating minister. But, if it had no cemetery, the thane must himself have maintained his chaplain by some other means, for in such case all his tithes were ordained to be paid to the primeriae ecclesiae, or mother church. This proves that the kingdom was then universally divided into parishes, which division happened probably not all at once, but by degrees, for it seems pretty clear and certain that the boundaries of parishes were originally ascertained by those of a manor or manors, since it very seldom happens that a manor extends itself over more parishes than one, though there are often many manors in one parish. The lords, as Christianity spread itself, began to build churches upon their own demesnes, or wastes, to accommodate their tenants in one or two adjoining lordships, and, in order to have divine service regularly performed therein, obliged all their tenants to appropriate their tithes to the maintenance of one officiating minister, instead of leaving them at liberty to distribute them among the clergy of the diocese in general. And this tract of land, the tithes whereof were so appropriated, formed a distinct parish, which will well enough account for the frequent intermixture of parishes one with another. For if a lord had a parcel of land detached from the main of his estate, but not sufficient to form a parish of itself, it was natural to him to endow his newly erected church with the tithes of those disjoined lands, especially if no church was then built in any lordship adjoining to those outlying parcels. 2. The civil division of the territory of England is into counties. Of those counties, 200. Of those hundreds, into tithings, or towns, which division, as it now stands, seems to owe its original to King Alfred, who, to prevent the rapiness and disorders which formerly prevailed in the realm, instituted tithings, so called from the Saxon, because 10 freeholders with their families composed one. These all dwelt together, and were sureties, or free pledges, to the king for the good behavior of each other, and, if any offence were committed in their district, they were bound to have the offender forthcoming, and therefore anciently no man was suffered to abide in England above 40 days, unless he were enrolled in some tithing or decennary. One of the principal inhabitants of the tithing is annually appointed to preside over the rest, being called the tithing man, the headborough, words which speak their own etymology, and in some countries the borsholder, or borough's elder, being supposed the discreetest man in the borough, town, or tithing. Tithings, towns, or vills, are of the same signification in law, and had, each of them, originally, a church and celebration of divine service, sacraments, and burials, which to have, or have had, separate to itself, is the essential distinction of a town, according to Sir Edward Coke. The word town or vill is indeed, by the alteration of times and language, now become a generical term, comprehending under it the several species of cities, boroughs, and common towns. A city is a town incorporated, which is or has been the see of a bishop, and though the bishopric be dissolved, as at Westminster, yet still it remains a city. A borough is now understood to be a town, either corporate or not, that sent its burgesses to Parliament. Other towns there are, to the number, Sir Edward Coke says, of 8,803, which are neither cities nor boroughs, some of which have the privileges of markets, and others not, but both are equally towns in law. To several of these towns there are small appendages belonging, called hamlets, which are taken notice of in the Statute of Exeter, which makes frequent mention of entire vills, demivills, and hamlets. Entire vills Sir Henry Spelman conjectures to have consisted of 10 freemen, or frank pledges, demivills of 5, and hamlets of less than 5. These little collections of houses are sometimes under the same administration as the town itself, sometimes governed by separate officers, in which last case it is, to some purposes in law, looked upon as a distinct township. These towns, as was before hinted, contained each originally but one parish, and one tithing, though many of them now, by the increase of inhabitants, are divided into several parishes and tithings, and sometimes, where there is but one parish, there are 2 or more vills or tithings. As 10 families of freeholders make up a town or tithing, so 10 tithings composed a superior division, called a hundred, as consisting of 10 times 10 families. The hundred is governed by a high constable or bailiff, and formerly there was regularly held in it the 100 court for the trial of causes, though now fallen into disuse. In some of the more northern counties, these hundreds are called wapentakes. The subdivision of hundreds into tithings seems to be most peculiarly the invention of Alfred. The institutions of hundreds themselves he rather introduced than invented, for they seem to have obtained in Denmark, and we find that in France a regulation of this sort was made above 200 years before, set on foot by Clotarius and Childebert, with the view of obliging each district to answer for the robberies committed in its own division. These divisions were, in that country, as well military as civil, and each contained 100 freemen, who were subject to an officer called the centenarius, a number of which centenarii were themselves subject to a superior officer called the count or comes.